keep it live, cause I thrive. I might just blow your mind tonight. I'm so hyped, but it's no hype. From this height, it's direct hits on sight. I'm your type, lend me your ears to show you that there's something in me. I'm not giving up, I'm standing right here, holding these days hostage. And I'll make this my year. We turning fear into love, and the love's in the air. I love doing this cause nothing compares. Nothing can share that same type of feeling when you feeling them flares. They can't catch it, it's havoc. I rip to a tear, switch a scenario. My stereos, I leave them impaired. Variables start to change and they're all in my range. I just gotta grab it, it's all mathematics. Every step is drastic, I make it fantastic. I'm trying to take your breath away. Asthmatic.
This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo. This is live through the stereo. Go and let it blow, blow through the stereo. I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo, stereo.
Yeah, just nod your head with it, so explicit and vivid. Every image is intricate, intimate. I put my all into it, no scrimmage and no rules. I'm a pro tool, hear my heartbeat, beat into the vocals. I'm so loco, lost my mind, oh no. It's ponderoso, dope, so no overdose, cause it's dope, yo. Man, this is house grown, mixed with some milestones. So I let the style flow down like the Dow Jones, bringing it with some foul tones, letting the crowd know we getting loud, so it's eardrum rudiments. Yeah, we bring it rude again. Move, little hooligan. Music for tuning in, full time to the 10. I'm on my clock like I told you. I'm doing this for dreams we pursuing.
Hey everybody, welcome back to the Anti-Media Radio Show. Once again with your host, Nick Burnaby, here on UCY.tv and the antimedia.org/radio. We got a really special show in store for you tonight. We've got several anarchists lined up as our panel, and we're going to have a debate. There's been a lot of buzz about this debate going on, and there's been a lot of conversation, like for several years now, ever since the this idea of anarchism started to gain traction once again. You know, it's not a new idea. It's been around for a long time. I mean, the argument could be made that anarchism predates civilization in some ways, I guess you could say. So we're going to have a conversation tonight. Hopefully, we are going to be able to learn some things about anarchism. We're going to be able to have some arguments about the philosophy. Maybe I think a lot of people listening tonight aren't that familiar with anarchism, and so they'll be able to learn a little bit about that. I'm going to kind of lay out some very, very basic ground rules, and and then after that, we're going to get started. Also, before we get into this, because I know we're probably going to have a hard ending and I won't be able to say much at the end of this, the show is going to be about an hour long. We're going to have about 55 minutes of debate. Thank you all for supporting our new homepage, the antimedia.org. We rolled it out Monday morning, and it's been a huge success, and we're just super stoked about this. We're really trying to bring a whole new element to the news, the independent news ecosystem, and we're all going to benefit from this, whether you're a libertarian, a progressive, a socialist, a communist, an anarchist, a capitalist, doesn't matter. We're having, on our new homepage, we have a broad set of news outlets from all across the political spectrum, opinion, live, raw media, and all kinds of stuff going on the antimedia.org. And then, of course, here on the radio show, I promised several weeks ago that we're going to take my radio show in a more philosophical direction, and that's exactly what we're trying to deliver for everybody tonight. So, with that being said, let me introduce everyone. I'll lay out the rules, and then we'll start asking questions and see where it goes. So first off, I've got Micah Naziri on the line. What's up, Micah? How you doing tonight?
Hey, pretty good. What's up, man?
Hanging in there, man. So Micah, just real quick, tell us a little bit about yourself, and then I'll get to introducing everybody else.
I'm coming on pretty much to represent some of the left end of the spectrum of anarchist thought. I don't necessarily subscribe to one particular school of thought that could be identified as anarcho-communism or this or that. Most closely, I would say that that philosophically, green anarchism, a touch of anarcho-primitivism, and elements of voluntary anarcho-communism are all things that form my philosophical outlook on what is, let's put it this way, what is the most consistent application of anarchistic principles to society and the world at large, the ecosystem, and so on.
Micah, you also do a lot of activism, and you have a couple of independent news websites. Tell us a little bit about your activism before we move on.
Yeah. Well, I've been involved in activism really since the early to mid '90s. My roots are in environmental activism and eco defense, and got into a lot of anti-racist activism through Antifa and Sharp involvement in the '90s, and that broadened out to a lot more as I got involved with different communities, different Muslim communities and so on, and bringing Jews and Muslims together to talk face to face and reconcile differences and have civil debates. That broadened my activism in the late '90s, early 2000s, and since then into a lot of issues that are relevant to those communities, and particularly again coming full circle to anti-fascist type activism. There have been a number of viral stories in the past year that I really didn't think or know would go viral, including our mosque defense protest that ended up with me debating with the one lady who stayed, and my friend Cynthia giving her a hug and her doing a tour of the masjid and all that stuff for about an hour afterwards. So some that are really positive, feel-good stories like that, and some that are me, I guess kind of legally terrorizing Brock Turner, the Stanford rapist, at his house, and doing things like that. Or going to the RNC and doing a lot of armed Trump protests, protesting Trump, being, just really carrying the mantle of anti-fascism to those protests and being.
I remember seeing a lot of the articles came out actually about your protest at the Trump rally, because people were really surprised that people would be protesting Trump would be carrying weapons. So yeah, that was very, very interesting. Really been following your activism work really closely. So thank you for joining us. Let me get everyone else introduced here. Also joining us from further to the right, we have the well-known philosopher Larken Rose. What's up, Larken? How you doing tonight, man?
Hey, doing pretty good.
Thank you for joining us. Can you quickly tell us a little bit about your work? I mean, I know you've been involved in a bunch of different things. I've seen a lot of your videos, and I've seen a lot of the work you've done with Josie and stuff. Can you quickly tell our audience a little bit about the work that you do?
Well, let's see, it goes back kind of forever. I accidentally became a voluntarist before there was that term over 20 years ago. And anarcho-capitalist, which my main complaint about that term is that it's redundant. But I'm sure that'll come up in the debate. And since then, I started just randomly ranting at people I knew and could count the number of anarchists I knew on one hand for the first 3 or 4 or 5 years, and then watching it explode and spread and basically watching humanity become ready to start thinking about these ideas. Obviously, we're still a minority of the people, but it's become a discussion all over the place instead of, in 3 people's basement. And so along the way, I've done a whole bunch of YouTube videos and written several books. The Most Dangerous Superstition being the most important thing I've ever written. And The Iron Web is a novel I wrote while in prison. Oh, I guess I can throw in that they stuck me in a cage for a year for not sending in pieces of paper to the IRS. So they gave me free room and board while I wrote 2 books. That was nice of them. So yeah, and writing, I don't know how many articles and interviews and videos and all sorts of stuff, basically promoting what I consider to be the bleeding obvious. And it feels really weird to have it be that unusual to state the bleeding obvious. And I know there's, I even feel weird about being called a philosopher, because to me that, has a connotation of, uses big confusing words that nobody can understand. I state the bleeding obvious in a way that every 5-year-old should be able to understand, because the concepts of non-aggression and self-ownership are really just ridiculously simple. And the only reason everybody doesn't already embrace them is because of the massive amount of indoctrination people are put through to make them believe in the mythical deity called government and authority. And so I just try to get people back to where they would be if they were 5-year-olds who hadn't been indoctrinated, and go, yeah, I shouldn't hit you, you shouldn't hit me, let's get along. Because that's pretty much the punchline of voluntarism, is don't attack people and don't vote for somebody else to attack people either. So pretty much everything I do is different ways to say that.
Sounds simple enough. Thanks again for joining us. And then we have a surprise guest on the line who is a longtime contributor to the Anti-Media, Justin King, who's going to be kind of representing a middle ground here between the two kind of sides of anarchism. Justin King, thanks for joining us. How are you doing tonight?
Pretty good. How are you?
I'm doing really well. Really excited to get this thing started. Justin, can you tell us just real quick about yourself and your work and your activism and stuff?
I'm an anarchist without adjectives. I guess activism started in the 90s, and then I kind of went off to the side for a while. I did some military contracting. I was a smuggler. I'm also alumni of Club Fed. Got out, went into independent media. I still do activism. I try to separate the two. I guess I'm a little bit more militant than some. I think the most popular quote is, I'm not a journalist today. I'm just here for the violence. So that's where I'm at. And I just have I don't think that we can force an economic system in anarchism. So.
All right, sounds good. So I think we're ready to get this thing started. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go in order of how I introduced you guys. So Micah's first, Larken's going to go second, Justin's going to go third. I'm going to ask everybody the same questions. Each person will have about 2 minutes to respond, and then everyone will have an optional rebuttal that'll be 1 minute long. Of course, these rules are not rigid. We're all anarchists here, so I know it's not going to be easy following the rules and stuff. But just to try to keep somewhat of an organization here, I'm going to be fielding questions from our audience via text message. The people have the number, most people don't. So I'm going to be, I've got several people who I trust to field some really good questions here in the studio. We're going to be fielding some questions. I've already got a few of them lined up, but I also want to let the conversation go in a direction that whichever direction it takes from everybody on the call here. Yeah, that being said, let's get started. The most simple question, Micah, what does anarchism mean to you?
Well, I take it very literally that it means without rulers, or without a ruler in particular. I guess you could simply say a stateless society, or a philosophy that sees human existence as not involving the state, and the state is irrelevant to the function of human societies. Maybe that was too condensed.
No, you're good. I think it is a pretty simple. It is a pretty simple question, and it's really easy to ask. Larken, what's your definition of anarchism?
It's even more simple when the guy before you answered it for you. Basically, the exact same thing. It just means a lack of a ruling class. And the reason I call myself a voluntarist as often as I use the term anarchist is that's a little bit more. It means you want all human interaction to be nonviolent and voluntary. Because in theory, you could be an anarchist who doesn't want a ruling class but wants to go chop up and eat his neighbors and still be an anarchist. I don't know any anarchists who are like that. But yeah, all anarchist means is no ruling class.
Cool. Justin King, same question to you.
Yeah, no rulers. I think we're actually in agreement on that. I think everybody's got pretty much the same definition.
Common ground already. Anyway, I forgot to mention, towards the end of the show here, I want to try to find some common ground between us, because the one thing, and Larken, you already mentioned this, we are an extreme minority. Anarchists, I know a lot of people already tend to think this way and tend to think in a way of like live and let live. But self-described anarchists probably make up between 0 and 2% of the population. So, at the end of the show, I want to talk about a little bit about ways that maybe people who have disagreements within the philosophy can maybe work together in some kind of alliance against the state or whatever. So we're going to get to that. But first, I have some very, very controversial questions. This has been in the news lately, and I've noticed the reason I'm asking this question is because I've noticed a lot of my anarchist friends have been in sharp disagreement on this topic. And it goes back to self-prescribed white nationalists, Richard Spencer, I believe his name was. I can't even remember the guy's name. And the fact that he got punched the other day on camera when he was at the inauguration. And this has ignited a fierce debate online between anarchists and libertarians and anti-fascists and that kind of thing. So first, to Micah, is it okay to punch, I don't know if we can call him a Nazi per se, because he doesn't call himself a Nazi, but he's a person who advocates or entertains an idea of quote unquote peaceful genocide. Is it okay to punch somebody that does?
First, I would like to clarify that some individuals that are friends with Christopher Cantwell, who's now an out-of-the-closet neo-Nazi, have said that they personally witnessed Richard Spencer claiming to be a Nazi, and that at one of his speeches, somebody had on a shirt that said, punch Nazis. And he said, I'm right here, why don't you punch me? And this was, of course, before he got, clocked at the inauguration. I guess, he wasn't used to someone taking him up on the Nazi punch challenge. So he's definitely a Nazi. I mean, this is all the way back to my days with sharp anti-racist skins and anti-fascist action in the early 90s and mid-90s. Nazis always did this, and I know Nazis who have reformed themselves, former Hammerskins who are now Muslims in some cases, and married to Arab women and have mixed ethnicity children. And they've spilled the beans on this, that this was the sort of thing that was in the works for decades. The infiltration of government and law enforcement by neo-Nazis who, grew their hair out and were a little less noticeable, who would still use little cues and hints, the way a serial killer taunts the FBI with clues that are to them very obvious. It's the same thing that these guys do, and it's the same thing they do with their fashy haircuts and so on. Richard Spencer is absolutely a Nazi, and I not only don't have a problem with him being punched in the face, I don't have a problem with propagandists of neo-Nazism, ethnic cleansing, any type of genocide actually being assassinated.
That sounds like you've got a pretty clear stance there. Does anybody want to do a rebuttal now, or should we just keep asking everyone the same question? You have a chance real quick. Rebuttal, or we're going to go right to Larken Rose? All right, Larken, same question to you. I mean, do you think it's okay to punch neo-Nazis the way Richard Spencer was punched?
I'd make a distinction between just the sort of gut feeling of, yeah, you kind of deserved it, you're a butthead, and staying within the non-aggression principle. I think somebody merely saying they wish something was the case, no matter how horrible and stupid and oppressive and anything else, to set the precedent that it's okay to use violence against somebody for expressing what he hopes would happen is a bad idea. It's a violation of, it's even a violation of the self-ownership of that racist dumbass. And I don't know about that much about him. I looked, I heard the story and looked into it a little bit. The thing is as soon as you accept the precedent of, well, you abstractly, you advocate in the abstract something I think is really, really bad, so I'm going to violently attack you, it's a pretty dang slippery slope to, well, now I get to violently attack anybody who, for example, votes for taxes, because taxes are an act of violence. So am I going to go around punching every single Democrat and Republican because they say words that advocate something I consider to be immoral? So I think it's a bad idea. It's hard to feel sorry for somebody who's pretty openly a Nazi getting slugged, but as far as actual principles, I would have to oppose it.
Interesting, yeah, and this is a argument that I've been seeing playing out constantly on my news feed, and even in person. I was just having the argument earlier today with my business partner here, visiting me from Alabama, here in the studio. He's helping me come up with questions right now too. So quickly, if anyone wants to rebuttal, or we're gonna go right to Justin King.
I'd like to rebuttal. I think the big difference here. In theory, I don't disagree with what you're saying, in the sense that if someone abstractly is saying, for instance, I knew this Palestinian kid who one day just said the most asinine thing I'd ever heard, knowing my background, said, sometimes I just wish Hitler had succeeded. Well, that's a very abstract thing. It pissed me off when we got in an argument and he apologized and we moved on with our lives. But that was an abstract statement. There's a big difference between abstractly stating something because of frustration or black kids picked on you or whatever the fuck, to actually planning and implementing a strategy, a long-term strategic way of bringing about ethnic cleansing. That is itself an act of violence and propagandizing violence, and their rights have ended where the rights of those they seek to extinguish begin.
Larken, I'll give you a chance to respond to that.
Yeah, just really quickly. I don't know enough about what Spencer has actually done. I know hardly anything about him. I would agree that at some point, if somebody's actually involved in planning and carrying out and participating in acts of aggression, then defensive force is justified. It's kind of hard to see him standing around saying stuff as an example of defensive force. But again, I don't know exactly what he's doing other than standing around advocating stupid policies and stupid racist ideas. I just think it's better to be cautious in terms of not saying, well, you're kind of advocating something that's bad, so I'm just going to violently attack you, because that can very quickly lead to violence in all directions, all over the place.
Look, but I would. Can I interject one thing? Just one. I'm not trying to. Okay.
Just really quick, because we got to get to Justin King.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Justin. The one thing that I wanted to point out, and this isn't necessarily disagreeing with anything that you just said, but it's a quote from Adolf Hitler. And he said, the only one thing that could have ever stopped our movement, Nazism, is if our adversaries had understood its principle from the very first day and smashed it with the utmost brutality, smashing the nucleus of our movement. Hitler said that, and he was admitting that the only way the final solution, so-called, could have been prevented was by smashing the nucleus of their movement when they were at the beer halls propagandizing, before they burned the Reichstag, before Hitler was put in power, even though he lost the 32 election. And I agree with him. There's that statement that when an evil person tells you that they're going to do something evil, you should believe them. And I simply agree with this quote. And I think that the phrase "never again" has to be taken to heart as we today see Nazis resurging once again.
Okay.
Go ahead. We will be on this forever. Go ahead.
Go ahead, Larkin. Quickly, and then we're going to go to Justin.
Okay. Hitler was dead wrong. The way to end it is to end the belief in authority, and then it doesn't matter what politicians do. And having a fight over who should be the authority will never lead to peace.
Well,
Let me go to Justin King. I don't mean to interrupt too hard here. Justin, This question has been really debated a lot lately, and I think most of the questioning, most of the debate lies in at what point is somebody saying stuff and organizing stuff? At what point is it justifiable to counter their violent plans with violence yourself, even if they haven't acted on it yet? So, Justin, I mean, is it okay to punch this Richard Spencer dude?
Well, the easiest way to figure that out is to determine, is he a threat? The formula is simple. Intent plus capability equals threat. Does he have the capability at the moment? To a small degree, yes. He can inflict violence, and he has made it very clear that he intends, if he ever got true power, to go after it. So he is a threat. He's a minor threat, and I think the use of force that was used, it's excusable. It's justifiable. I don't know if I'd go as far as Micah and say shoot him. I mean, I wouldn't cry if it happened, but I don't think I'd advocate that. But I think we need to draw a line at the same time between Nazis that are advocating even, quote, peaceful ethnic cleansing, and these white nationalist guys that want to move out to Montana or North Dakota or whatever, build their own little community and live by themselves. I have no problem with those guys. If they want to do that, if any ethnicity wants to do that, I'm cool with that. In fact, remove yourselves. That's awesome. It's the rhetoric behind actually forcibly removing another ethnicity, and especially using them as a scapegoat to force your rise to power. That's what's dangerous, and that's what makes him a threat.
100% agreed.
Interesting. All right, so we're going to move on to the next question here, and it's kind of related to what we were just talking about. Larken brought up a great point about, if we're gonna say it's okay to punch a guy for, advocating, maybe Nazi-like ideologies. Don't we kind of blur the lines here, where anybody could say, well, that person is saying something that could endanger me, and so anybody could just be walking down the street and start getting punched? Micah, going back to you, I mean, where do you think the line should be drawn? Because I've seen the argument made online that, well, Mao was a communist and he actually killed more people than Hitler did, and so I've seen people on the right saying, well, does that mean that we can go around starting to punch communists?
Well, I think what we have to look at with the statism of Maoism or Leninism, Stalinism, and so on, is what they were doing was by and large very typical for the state since its inception in ancient Samaria. It wasn't necessarily that strange for a regime or totalitarian government to go after their political adversaries, just like Assad in Syria right now. He isn't saying, we're wiping out Sunnis. I absolutely abhor the guy, but he's not carrying out a genocide. He's not carrying out some formerly unprecedented thing like Nazism was. I mean, they had to invent this term genocide to describe it. Not to say that there were no genocides before it, but the systematic way in which it was approached and premeditated was in fact unique. And so I think Nazism is very different than any other philosophy of statism. And again, I think what Justin said about intent and the actual statement of this is what we're going to do if we're able to. So intent plus capability. If somebody's walking down the street and there's some guy who doesn't look like they have any capability and they have some shirt on that says "Kill Jews," I'm probably going to go over and talk to him. If it's some guy who has something like that and he's outside a synagogue or something and whatever, he's got a shirt like that, then I'm going to go up and at least punch him.
Interesting. So Larken, going to you, I got a similar question. I mean, is there a point where you can justify using violence against somebody's ideology? I mean, is there a point ever where you can say, where you would say, okay, at this point, this person has gone so far, even though they haven't personally committed an act of violence. Like, for instance, let's say, to go all the way to the extreme, let's say somebody is inciting a lynch mob and the guy's the ringleader. He's not doing the violence himself, but the mob is about to commit an act of violence. I mean, would you say that at that point it's okay to use violence to stop the guy, or do you think that there's, is there a time when you think we should be able to use violence to get someone doing that kind of thing?
Well, yeah, if someone's actually participating in, even if he's just at the top giving the orders. In fact, I think the guy at the top of any gang, including government, if he's giving orders to commit murder, the most moral thing to do is knock off the guy at the top. Even though, hey, I'm just telling other people to do it. Yeah, but you're directly participating in murder. You're just too much of a coward to be on the battlefield yourself. And the other situation is when somebody, utters an actual threat, like, I'm going to come kill you, like, then defensive force is justified. But I think anything short of actually being part of a physical threat doesn't justify a violent response, even if they're just obnoxiously, stupidly racist and advocating all sorts of violent crap. If they're not actually themselves a threat, it's not justified to use force against them. And again, it's sometimes hard to draw the line. Like I use the example often, like, okay, my neighbor who lives 3 blocks over calls and says, I hate you, I should beat you up. Okay, I'm not going to go shoot him because he said that. He comes closer, and then he has a gun, and then he pulls the gun out, and then he steps up on my porch, and then he raises the gun. Like, at some point, that counts as aggression, and I'm going to blow your head off. It may be hard to decide exactly where to draw that line, but the principle remains the same, which is until somebody is actually a physical threat and participating in an act of aggression, force isn't justified against him.
Justin, similar question to you, man. Where do you draw the line on this? Because, I've seen the arguments go back and forth. And of course, I think we've all got ideas that would scare the living hell out of some people, and that, it may cause them to think, oh shit, I need to react violently because this guy's an anarchist and he's going to get rid of my government check, or he wants to, whatever, you know what I mean. Justin, I mean, where do you think the line should be drawn here?
I'm going to stick with the same formula. Intent plus capability is threat. I think a good real world example, something that actually happened, and Micah was actually there. A group of Nazis threatened this mosque, and we went out there to intervene. The violent, super, tough guys on the internet, they wouldn't get out of the car. The only person that got out of the car was this older woman. Obviously, without them, she has no capability. It's not like we jumped on her and beat her. However, had those guys gotten out of the vehicle, yeah, we would have attacked them. And it would have been, in my mind, justified.
All right. Interesting. I mean, I think there's a little bit of an agreement here, at least, that, at some times violence can be used to repel I guess, ideas with intent of violence. So it is a very gray area. And again, this is the topic of so many debates I've been seeing online in our activist community. So we're going to stay kind of on the same line of thinking here. And we're going to talk about next what happened recently in Berkeley with Milo Yiannopoulos and the anti-fascists that kind of shut down his presentation in Berkeley. Micah, we're going to go to you first. Do you agree with what the anti-fascists did in Berkeley to shut down Milo's presentation?
Yeah, again, these guys are pretty tame by my standards. I'm not advocating that anyone specifically target any specific list of individuals, but abstractly, I am definitely saying that I believe it's morally justifiable to target propagandists of fascism, Nazism, ethnic cleansing. And in his case, that's exactly what he's talking about. he, like Richard Spencer, denies being a Nazi, comes up with these elaborate backstories to seemingly justify that he's not, with little to no evidence. And at the end of the day, we see him posting memes of praising Adolf Hitler. We see that he's named his Twitter account after the Emperor Nero, who was famous for slaughtering Jews. So this is, again, crypto-fascism. They're not going to come out and tell you publicly, hey, I'm a Nazi. What I'm selling you is Nazism. They're salesmen. They're the propagandists. And I think it's absolutely legitimate to use violence, destruction of property, sabotage, and or assassination to stop propagandists of ethnic cleansing.
So you think that was actually, I was going to follow up and ask you, I mean, how far do you think it's okay to go to stop these types of people? So morally killing them.
Yeah, morally, I think it's completely ethical. If you've confirmed what these people's intentions are, and they're not just some guy who fell into the wrong crowd because he was looking for some sort of tribe and didn't feel like he had any identity, so he fell in with some neo-Nazis or something. And no, I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about everyone. I'm not talking about the guys who go to Montana, like Justin said, or what's his name, Craig Cobb, even up in North Dakota. I'm talking about the people who are actively propagandizing fascism, putting a smiling face on fascism, and really just subtly doing the exact same thing that the Nazis did in the 20s into the 30s. They're following the exact same game plan. And again, I'm not singling out a specific person or telling anybody to violate the law. I'm simply saying philosophically, it's, in my opinion, ethical, 100% ethical. Not only ethical to do it like, well, I guess that's okay because this, but I think it's actually a moral imperative to do it.
So anybody have a rebuttal? If not, we're going to go straight to Larken Rose.
Yeah, well, my answer would be my rebuttal anyway.
So Larken, same question, man. What do you think of the anti-fascist protesters in Berkeley and them shutting down Milo?
I think it's hypocritical as hell to pretend to be anti-fascist and use violence to silence opposition. Milo is not a threat. He's a dumbass. He's a statist. He's saying stupid crap. He has no ability to actually commit aggression against anybody. So when you trespass on private property, when you forcibly interfere with an event, you are the aggressor, you are in the wrong, and people have the right to defend against you.
Okay, anybody want to do a rebuttal here, or I'm going to go to Justin?
Well, I would say, sure, that's, if we're going to talk about a stateless society, I would say, sure. At this point, it gets into sort of old world rules, pre-civilization rules, and it's simply a philosophical disagreement. The guy says, somebody says maybe on the guy's behalf he's not a threat. Another group, particularly of minorities who have been oppressed by people that he praises, says, I think he is a credible threat, and I think he's doing what these other people who murdered my family did. They're saying, look, we got a difference of opinion. I'm going to go out there and do violence. If you want to try to stop me, then may the best man win. And I think that's perfectly legitimate. If Milo and Alex Jones and the Chris Cantwells of the world would like to go out there and say, hey, we're going to defend, then cool. Like that's how it goes all the way back to before we were Homo sapiens sapiens.
Larken, do you want to respond to that?
I don't find it cool to resort to violence because we disagree with what other people say. That does not turn out well. And incidentally, that exact same mentality is what the alt-right uses to justify violent attacks on communists. And I hope we get to it on this show because I think communism is inherently violent and immoral, but you won't catch me beating somebody up for advocating it.
Now, do you mean communism in terms of state communism, or do you mean communism in terms of like the Qumran community of Essenes in first century Judea?
I mean, any communist who actually believes, to each according to his need, who believes that need creates ownership and would therefore use force to take what somebody else has produced in the name of need is inherently an aggressor, and they're advocating aggression. If people want to go voluntarily do a commune over there, fine, and they don't mess with people who want to trade in different ways, fine, that's voluntary. It fits perfectly within a stateless voluntary society. But if people actually believe that their need entitles them to the fruits of somebody else's labor, they are advocating something violent and immoral. And them advocating that does not justify me punching them out or blowing their heads off.
Now, I would agree with most of what you're saying, particularly in principle. I would, however, say that we almost certainly have a philosophical difference on what someone producing wealth of their own labor is, and what someone stealing wealth is, whether from the ecosystem or from monopolizing employment opportunities and basically forcing somebody into a coercive arrangement. So I think we would differ on that, but we both agree on the lack of the use of state. However, what I would say is that genocide is not a philosophical opinion. Genocide is a threat. And so we cannot compare apples to oranges and say, well, this philosophy, this economic philosophy, which is what Marxism was. Marx actually was not himself advocating for a state, and in the Communist Manifesto said that it wouldn't be organic actual communism if a state was the one to bring it from the top down. He was an economic philosopher, a student of Hegel, and observed the rise and fall of nations. So that's a philosophy. Communism is a philosophy. Nazism is not simply a philosophy. It's an actual threat of genocide.
Communism is absolutely a threat of violence, and you can call one a different name. They are both collectivist philosophies that justify the use of violence against individuals to serve a supposedly philosophical goal. And you see that including on a stateless level. There have been communes that ended up with the guys at the top having machine guns and bossing everybody else around in the name of need. So it's absolutely a philosophy that is also a threat of violence, unless the people actually specify, hey, we're not going to mess with people who want to do things differently. We just want to do it this way. But a true communist who stays true to the notion of to each according to his need, from each according to his ability, inherently has no respect for property rights and has no respect for what a person produces, and will be a thief if he acts according to what he advocates, which means he is absolutely a threat. And yet, him advocating that doesn't justify me punching him out.
Okay, Micah, if you want to respond quickly, and then we're going to go to Justin King.
Yeah, just very quickly. Again, well, you go on to Justin King. I think we just have basically a philosophical difference, for instance, of what someone producing wealth of their own labor. Obviously, I think somebody makes a bowl, they own that bowl, they possess that bowl. Somebody builds a house, they have a house. In fact, Marx even gave an example similar to that in the Communist Manifesto, where even a mansion that somebody built would be acceptable to his economic principles, so long as they did not monopolize and limit opportunity, thereby coercing the theft of labor value from workers who had no other choice. So then you get into the philosophical difference of what is somebody earning money. Are you earning money by coercing somebody? Are you, if I gobble up all the land, I claim all the land, all the resources, and you go to try to pick fruit, and I say, no, I own that, and I have my Pinkerton private security cops there with machine guns, like corporations did to what became the unions eventually. Then is that voluntary? If they then say, okay, I'll work for a quarter a day, or is that theft that the people, not the state, are morally entitled to reclaim? That's a philosophical difference that I don't think we're going to agree on.
Yeah, I don't know if we can quite bridge this gap on, I guess, property rights here. But let's go to Justin and bring this back to this issue that went on in Berkeley with the anti-fascist protesters that shut down Milo. Justin, do you think, what are your feelings on this action in Berkeley?
I I think that everybody skipped over the most important element of Milo. He's going from campus to campus. Earlier everybody agreed if somebody is, in charge of a lynch mob and they're going to, encourage other people to commit violence, the moral thing is to go after them. He is going campus to campus, advocating that people contact and inform on their classmates and get a hold of ICE to get them deported. Now, as far as his rhetoric, I don't care. I agree with Larken on that. He's not much of a threat in that manner. However, his actions in trying to create an informer state, I would have preferred that the people in Berkeley went after him personally. But again, not advocating, just it would have made me happier had that happened. I think that he is a threat in that regard. He is definitely advocating the use of state violence on a new level. So anyway.
So Justin, I have a follow-up question for you, because I noticed it after what went on in Berkeley. Milo's book sales spiked up like 12,000%. And do you think that doing these kind of things, and very similar to what happened with Richard Spencer, do these people become martyrs, and do the actions of the anti-fascists backfire against what they claim to be trying to do?
I don't think so. Those kind of actions, they are, and people are going to get mad when I say this, but they fit into the realm of asymmetrical warfare, let's call it. Let's not use the T word. And the whole idea behind that is to get out there, cause issues, and bring the problem to light. That's what's happened. And eventually what people realize is the government is not going to be able to control this, and then they start to side with the insurgent or whoever. So I think that tactically what they're doing is sound.
Sorry, did you cut out there at the end? I didn't catch the last thing you said.
I think overall, strategically, what they're doing is sound. They're provoking a response, which is, if you are in the minority, that's what you're supposed to do. You're supposed to force the opposition to show their true colors.
Very interesting. And these guys are going to head back to Berkeley, and they know what's going to happen. I think a lot of people know that there's going to be some crazy shit going down. That's something that, of course, we're going to be covering on the anti-media. Getting that plug out of the way real quick. So the big question here, and I think this is what really divides a lot of people within the anarchist realm, is the question of capitalism. So let's have a debate. Let's finish this off with let's talk about capitalism. I don't think we're going to have time to get to the common ground stuff. We only had an hour. We're going to have to continue the debate some other time, because we obviously need to find common ground in places because we are such a minority. I think we all know that there's very few of us. The number is growing, and maybe there's people that are sympathetic to our cause that just don't realize it yet. That's probably a huge factor. So capitalism, this is a huge divisive issue within the anarchist philosophy. Micah, for or against capitalism, and why?
Well, I think it depends on what somebody means by capitalism. I see a lot of conflation and amalgamation of the notions of black markets and free markets and so on with what capitalism has historically been in practice. And what we see in practice is going all the way to the broad view of the ecosystem as merely a collection of resources to be exploited for corporate profit, and or workers as themselves just there to be exploited if you can somehow finagle and trick them into accepting the lowest wage possible by having claimed all of this that you didn't produce. A mine, this mountain belongs to me and my corporation. This orchard, this island, whatever it is, it belongs to us. And you don't have any opportunities? Oh, well, here, work for this tiny amount of money. I don't view that philosophically as voluntary, and yet that is indeed the core of what capitalism has been forever. And so I don't see that. I don't see capitalism in practice, not in the theory utopian Ancapistan world of libertarianism, but in practice, I don't see real world capitalism as being voluntary in any way. I see it as corporate statism.
Interesting. So Larkin, same question to you: for or against capitalism, and why?
Well, I find that when the people who bash capitalism and then the people who praise capitalism are almost never talking about the same thing. And when people point at what we have now and say, this is what capitalism causes, all anarcho-capitalists that I know cringe and say, this is corporate fascism. If you can't distinguish between that and what we're advocating, it's going to be kind of pointless trying to have a discussion. Anarcho-capitalists believe in the definition of capitalism, which is economic trade without interference of the state. And that's all it meant before. That used to be the definition. And now people can argue over it all over the place, which is why these days I try to just get away from the semantics instead of arguing over what the word really means, is get to the underlying principles. And now I'll try to be really quick here. Now we're getting to the point that I had hoped would be like the main focus of the show. But I have two very simple questions for self-labeled communists, and never, ever have I had any communist answer these directly. Imagine you and I are on an island. I spend the day making a bow and arrow, and you spend the day doing something else. At the end of the day, we're both hungry, and we both, quote unquote, need food, and there are fish in the stream. Does your need create the same claim to the use of that bow and arrow as my need, or does the fact that I made the damn thing mean it's mine and I get to decide what to do with it? That's question number one. Now,
would you like an answer to that before?
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Okay. Well, if you're going by the definition of each according to their need and according to their ability and so on, the person who sat out building such a weapon had the ability, presumably. And so if we're philosophically speaking of what's moral, if that person didn't have the ability, if they were somehow handicapped or a child, and you went and hunted or got food in some way and didn't provide for them according to their need, that would be an immoral act. It's not to say the state should exist and get involved in it. It's to say that you're an asshole.
Two things. First of all, you changed the question in order to answer it. I didn't say the other person didn't have the ability to make a bow and arrow. Second of all, that answer is inherently immoral because you just declared that the guy who can make a bow and arrow is the slave of the guy who can't, because he's morally obligated to serve someone else.
If he can make it, I'm saying he has, because of his ability, he has the obligation to work. So according to, I'm not even a pure communist in any way, but according to communist theory, his lack of working would not entitle him to sustenance because he had the ability to work. So that's answered right there.
I still don't know what your answer was. There's two people. They're both perfectly capable. One makes a bow, one doesn't. Does need determine who owns it? Or does who made it determine who owns it?
Need plus ability is the communist criterion.
Yeah, and I think that's insane and inherently evil and violent to claim that.
It answers your question, though.
Yeah. And then, okay, so it answers the question in the evil, violent way. Question number two. If I make a bow and arrow, and then at the end of the day we both want fish, and I say, hey, you can use the bow and arrow I made if we get to split whatever you catch. Does that make me an evil capitalist exploiter pig dog who deserves to be violently overthrown and have his bow and arrow stolen, or is that a perfectly moral offer?
It sounds moral to me.
Okay, guess what? You're a capitalist. I just described the means of production being privately owned, and you agreed with it. So
that's argumentum ad reductio. That's not what
reducing it to a perfectly pure, perfectly clear, simplest example you could possibly have. means of production is privately owned.
I got a question for both of you guys.
All right, hold
I have a
on.
question.
All right, yeah, Justin King, your turn to jump in on this, and then I'm going to ask you the question after you respond. Go ahead, man.
Okay. Everybody on this phone call, in some way or another, we consider ourselves revolutionaries. In some way or another, we're proposing the revolutionary idea of getting rid of the state. We can convince people, and we have it in our minds, that we're going to be able to convince people they can survive without something they've been conditioned to believe they need. Why is it so hard to think that we can come up with a system that is neither exploitive nor necessitates a state? Because at the end of the day, capitalism turns into feudalism. At the end of the day, communism does need a state. It needs somebody to enforce it. All we really need to do is shift what people get their self-worth from. Use a capitalist system, but instead of people getting their self-worth from the idea of owning 16 cars, both of you guys are respected because you empower people to achieve freedom. Let's make that the standard. Sure, you made that money. What did you do with it? How many people did you help? And if we can change that and make it voluntary on a philosophical level, then all of this becomes a moot point.
I think that's absolutely true. And I think that's philosophically where a lot of libertarianism and capitalism rests, is with the assumption that everybody is moral and ethical. But like I said, with the answer to the example of the guy who had the ability but did not work to produce his means of obtaining sustenance, that is, the guy should just sit there and starve because he had the ability. But if somebody is a little child or disabled and you don't provide for them, I'm not suggesting a state should be involved. I'm suggesting that there's a lack of morality on the part of the person who said, I made this little 2-year-old didn't make shit, so he's going to starve. That person's an asshole. That person's, but that's consistent with capitalism. And I would agree with you that, number one, I don't think that there needs to be a state to solve any of these problems. But at the end of the day, the capitalist has to ask themselves, even if there's a voluntary non-state implementation of capitalism, does the fact that something is voluntary make it good morally? The fact that somebody has produced something, does that mean that hoarding it is ethical? Ethical questions are a different set of questions than the question of, should there be a state to impose ethics? And I think we all are in agreement that there should not be. But at the same time, that doesn't mean that anything you do outside of a state is ethical. And I think that might be the big core of the philosophical difference, some of them at least.
So let me quickly interject something that I've observed, and then we're going to close it out here with Larken with a quick question I have for you, because the other two guys already pretty much answered this. I've noticed that a lot of the debating that goes on between leftist anarchists and right-wing anarchists is people trying to convince each other that they're wrong and that they're right. And I've seen people just hit brick walls constantly. That being said, Larken, I mean, do you think that it would be a good idea for a left and right anarchist coalition to try to build one and try to use that to oppose the state?
No, actually. I think the thing that actually matters is whether the people in general believe in self-ownership or believe in authoritarianism. And so as far like there isn't a way to go do something to government to create a stateless society. Where the problem resides and where the answer resides is between the ears of 8 billion people on the planet. You can't go make it happen by doing something to DC. And I think I don't want an alliance with somebody who thinks they have a right to steal what I produce on an individual level any more than by way of the state.
Thanks, man. That we come up to the end of our show. Thank you all for tuning in. Thank you all for joining us for this debate. Anti-Media Radio will be back tomorrow night.
I'ma let them know through the stereo. Yo, here we go through the stereo.